$2.5 trillion, not billion. Trillion. Say it out loud. $2.5 trillion. Gone, missing, unaccounted for. And the Pentagon has failed its audit 8 years in a row trying to find it. 8 years in a row. The most powerful military institution on the face of the earth cannot find its own money for 8 consecutive years. And nobody got fired, nobody got investigated, nobody stood in front of a camera and explained where the money went. But Elon Musk shut down USAID in 72 hours because of waste, fraud, and abuse. And Congressman Moskowitz just made them admit it, live on camera, in their own words. Keep watching, because what happened next in that hearing room is something you need to see, and something the people who don't want you watching these hearings are desperately hoping you miss. Here's the setup. The witness, a government accountability. Official opens by talking about how we need more transparency, more auditing, tighter consequences for agencies that can't account for their spending, and Moskowitz smiles, because he's already got them. This is what a trap looks like before it closes. The witness is laying out exactly the standard that Moskowitz is about to apply to the Pentagon. Mandatory disclosure, clear consequences, accountability tools, access and transparency. Every single word the witness says is going to be used against him in approximately 4 minutes. Watch exactly what happens. Mr. Kaplan, you spoke about issues and accountability. You mentioned that we should tighten mandatory disclosure requirements and add clear consequences for failure to comply. Would you recommend additional auditing and transparency tools? The witness says, absolutely. There should be clear consequences for failure to comply. Access and transparency are essential. Perfect. That's exactly what Moskowitz needed him to say. Now watch the trap close. I want to go with this logic for a second. Because there was waste, fraud, and abuse in USAID, we should get rid of it, right? That was the argument. I assume you would agree that in a $7 trillion budget we could probably find, in fact, we have found waste, fraud, and abuse in every department. The witness. That's right. So there's waste, fraud, and abuse in the Pentagon. The witness. Correct. And there's waste, fraud, and abuse in DHS. The witness. Yes. Done. The trap is closed. But Moskowitz isn't finished, because this is where it gets genuinely funny. In fact, we just saw $200 million be spent on DHS advertising. That sounds like a waste to me. I mean, it was more money than was spent on the last Jurassic Park movie, or one of the Lord of the Rings movies, or one of the Harry Potter movies. I think the Barbie movie was less expensive. In fact, I think every movie except one that was nominated for an Oscar cost less than what Kristi Noem spent. Let that land for a second. Kristi Noem spent $200 million of your tax money on a DHS advertising campaign. The Barbie movie costs less. Every single Oscar-nominated film this year costs less. And nobody shut down DHS. Nobody fired Noem over the $200 million ad budget. Nobody proposed eliminating ICE over it. But USAID, the agency that feeds starving children, and prevents disease outbreaks, and builds the relationships that keep America out of wars that got shut down overnight because of waste. Now here's the question Moskowitz was building toward the entire time, and it's a question that has no good answer. No one's talking about getting rid of the Pentagon just because there's waste, fraud, and abuse, right? That would be unreasonable. You agree? The witness. Of course. Right? So it would be unreasonable. That's where the disconnect is. Somehow, because this agency, no different than all the other agencies, has waste, fraud, and abuse, we eliminated the entire thing. We never had the conversation where we said, hey look, these programs, delete them. These things, get rid of them. Every other agency gets that benefit of the doubt. We're giving that benefit of the doubt to the Pentagon. Silence. Because there is no answer to that. And then Moskowitz lands the final number. Let me say that again. Over $2.5 trillion missing in the Pentagon. Like real money? Real money. Not misallocated, not respent, not redirected to a different budget line. Missing. The Pentagon cannot find $2.5 trillion. And Doge has not said a single word about it. Not one tweet. Not one dramatic live stream from inside the Pentagon's accounting department. Not one press conference where Elon Musk stands in front of a whiteboard and explains where the money went. You know why? Because Elon Musk has over $15 billion in Pentagon contracts. SpaceX, Starlink, defense contracts that depend on keeping the relationship with the Department of Defense intact. He doesn't want to audit the Pentagon, he wants contracts from the Pentagon. And there is a significant difference between cutting waste and protecting the institutions that give you money while eliminating the ones that don't. Let's put the $2.5 trillion in terms that actually mean something. That is free healthcare for every single American for an entire year. That is Meals on Wheels for every senior citizen in this country for multiple decades. That is the complete elimination of student loan debt for an entire generation, with hundreds of billions left over. That is building a world-class public school in every single congressional district in America, and having enough left over to fund them for the next 50 years. That is fixing every single piece of crumbling infrastructure in the United States. Every bridge, every road, every water system, and still having change left over. That is what's missing. And before you say, well, accounting errors in a $900 billion institution are complex. Sure, fine, I'll give you that. But 8 years? 8 consecutive years of failing the same audit. At what point does complex accounting become something else? Moskowitz's answer: at the point where a $40 billion agency feeding children gets shut down in 72 hours for the same thing. That is the point. And the people who are currently screaming about USAID waste, the people who shut down the agency that has prevented more famines and stopped more disease outbreaks than any institution in human history, those same people cannot pass a single audit, cannot account for a single dollar of that $5 trillion, and are currently asking Congress for an additional $200 billion for a potential military action against Iran. Think about that sequence. USAID shut down in 72 hours. No conversation, no line-by-line review. Gone. Pentagon failed 8 consecutive audits. $2.5 trillion unaccounted for. $9 million spent on crab legs. $220 million spent on furniture. $100,000 spent on a Steinway piano. Still fully funded. Leadership still in place. Nobody fired. Nobody investigated. And Moskowitz made them admit it in sequence, in their own words, in an open congressional hearing, that by their own logic, what was done to USAID should have been done to every agency with documented waste, including the Pentagon. The witness agreed. He had to, because the logic is airtight. If waste, fraud, and abuse justifies eliminating an agency overnight, then the Pentagon should have been shut down 8 years ago. If the standard is accountability and transparency, then the institution that has failed every single audit for 8 consecutive years should be first in line. But that's not what happened. What happened is that an agency with a $40 billion budget that feeds children and prevents pandemics was eliminated in 3 days, and the institution with a $900 billion budget that cannot find $2.5 trillion gets a $200 billion increase. Moskowitz pointed at this in that hearing room with zero ambiguity. He used their own words, their own logic, their own accountability framework. The one the witness had just finished explaining needed to be applied more rigorously, and he turned it directly back on them. But here is the part that nobody covered. The witness is not some random political appointee. This is a government accountability official, someone whose entire professional purpose is to identify waste, fraud, and abuse in federal agencies and demand consequences. And Moskowitz got him, on the record, to agree that the standard being applied to USAID should apply equally to every federal agency, including the ones with $2.5 trillion missing. You want consequences for failure to comply. Great. Point at the Pentagon. You want transparency and accountability. Perfect. Start with the 8 consecutive failed audits. You want to eliminate waste, fraud, and abuse. Then explain why the agency with $2.5 trillion missing is getting a budget increase, while the agency that prevented the last 3 regional famines is gone. They couldn't. And then Moskowitz does something that most politicians never do in a congressional hearing. He gets personal. Look, in my own household budget, my kids are definitely wasting money. There's definitely abuse going on based on the amount of boxes that show up at my house every day. My wife is definitely committing fraud. The gallery laughs. But here's why that moment matters. Because what he says next is the entire point. But I'm not getting rid of these people. What am I going to do? I'm going to sit them down at the kitchen table and say, we need to spend less. What are we spending on? We never got to have that conversation with USAID. We never got to say, hey, these programs, delete them. These things, get rid of them. Every other agency gets that benefit of the doubt. We're giving that benefit of the doubt to the Pentagon. That is the argument. Not a partisan argument. Not a left versus right argument. A logic argument. If the standard is, find waste, eliminate the entire agency overnight, then apply it consistently. Apply it to the institution that spent $9 million on crab legs. Apply it to the institution that spent $220 million on furniture. Apply it to the institution that spent $100,000 on a Steinway piano. Apply it to the institution that cannot find $2.5 trillion. Or admit that the standard was never about waste. It was about which agencies the people in power want to protect and which ones they want gone. And Moskowitz laid the trap so perfectly, question by question, admission by admission, number by number, that the witness walked directly into it, without understanding what was happening until the door had already closed behind him. You agree there's waste in the Pentagon? Yes. You agree there's waste in DA? Yes. You agree that waste doesn't justify eliminating an entire agency? Yes. So why did we eliminate USAID? Silence. That silence is the answer. It's also in the permanent record of a United States congressional hearing, alongside the $2.5 trillion, alongside the 8 consecutive failed audits, alongside the $9 million in crab legs and the $220 million in furniture, and the $100,000 Steinway piano that someone in the most powerful military institution on earth decided the taxpayers should buy, alongside one more number that Moskowitz didn't mention in that hearing, but that's sitting right behind all of this. But same people who cannot account for $2.5 trillion, the same people who spent $9 million on crab legs and passed 8 consecutive failed audits without consequence. Those people are currently asking Congress for an additional $200 billion for a potential military action against Iran. That is the full picture. USAID, gone in 72 hours. No conversation, no line-by-line review. No, which programs should we keep and which should we cut? Just gone. Because Elon Musk watched something and decided it was wasteful. Pentagon, $2.5 trillion missing. 8 failed audits. $9 million on crab legs. $220 million on furniture. $100,000 on a piano. Fully funded, leadership intact. And currently requesting $200 billion more. Moskowitz didn't just ask about this. He didn't just raise concerns. He got them in their own words on the permanent record of a United States congressional hearing to admit that the standard being applied to USAID was never being applied consistently. Witness agreed, because he had to. Because the logic is airtight. And now it's in the transcript. Forever. Here, single quotes is what I want you to think about before you scroll away. The people who shut down USAID will tell you it was about accountability, about efficiency, about making sure taxpayer money is spent responsibly, and then they will ask for $200 billion more for a potential war in Iran. From the same budget that cannot account for $2.50 trillion from the same institution that bought $9 million in crab legs from the same people who have failed 8 consecutive audits without a single consequence. If you want to keep watching these hearings, covered every single day, the moments that the mainstream coverage buries or ignores or spends 15 seconds on before moving to the next thing, hit subscribe, because we are not letting any of this disappear quietly. Drop a comment and tell me, what would you do with $2.5 trillion that the Pentagon cannot currently find? I genuinely want to know. And if you want to keep watching every single one of these hearings covered the moment they happen, hit subscribe, because we are not letting any of this disappear quietly. So what do you think about that moment? When Jared Moskowitz walked through that logic step by step, was that a fair comparison? Or does the Pentagon deserve a different standard? And more importantly, if that number is accurate, what do you think should actually happen next? Drop your thoughts in the comments. I'm reading all of them. And if you want more breakdowns of the moments that don't get fully explained on mainstream coverage, make sure to like the video and subscribe to Capital Clash.